right, here we are. Welcome to Screencast number 3. Very quickly, I just wanted to make my final comments here, and then we're moving forward. We're almost done here, okay? So, the negativity bias, it's one of the reasons why we focus on negative encounters so much. We have this bias toward that, and so the negative impressions seem to stick. And just like I was saying before I ran out of time, 3 compliments, 1 criticism. The 1 criticism will be the one that sort of sticks and we sort of have to deal with and live with, okay? So those are the 6 functions of imagined interactions, and some of the time we're doing more than one. So these functions are not independent of each other. Sometimes they occur simultaneously. I have a good example here regarding long-distance relationships. Compensating for the lack of real interaction in a long-distance relationship may be used to keep the relationship alive, as well as rehearsing what will be said at the next conversation. So sometimes you're doing more than one function with these. Sometimes it could be many of them. These inner conversations may be just as important as the actual conversations in managing our sense of social reality. So many times the imagined interactions that we have are playing a much bigger role than we would realize in the way that we manage our identities, the way that we manage our relationships in life. And this, because of point number 2, point number 3 here sounds a little crazy, but if you put the 2 together, it makes sense. These imagined interactions provide a mechanism for managing and living on the edge of chaos and complexity. That's Honeycutt, by the way. He's trying to make an argument for why his theory is important right there, and I think that he's using some overblown language, but I think it kind of captures really what imagined interactions do. When you really think about the number of relationships you navigate, when you really think about sometimes the difficult things that we go through. In week 8, I think it is, we're going to talk about emotional intelligence, and you're going to watch a talk at Google from Dr. Guy Finch. He's going to talk about emotional trauma. He's going to talk about things that hurt us. And I think that sometimes when we really take into consideration all that we go through, we do live on the edge of chaos and complexity. I mean, and what we have to manage and what we have to deal with every day is really amazing when you think about it, okay? So he says, it sounds like a bad movie trailer, on the edge of chaos and complexity, they didn't expect to find love or whatever they might do in the movie. So, but these imagined interactions play a very important role in the navigation of our daily lives. So let's talk about some of the attributes, okay? You're actually going to be using these in your second discussion board post this week, I believe is the second one. Don't quote me on that. I don't have the E2L open right now, but I believe it's your second one. So attributes are just, what are the pieces of it? What can we look at if we're studying them? So we can look at the frequency, okay? How often are you experiencing either imagined interactions in general or a particular imagined interaction? Is it proactive? Is it retroactive? Are you on the job search right now, and you're constantly thinking about answering job interview questions? I've been there. I know what that's like. Did you have something go down in your relational world that was negative, and you just sort of continue to think about that? What's the frequency? What's the emotional valence? How enjoyable was it? How uncomfortable was it? And the amazing thing is sometimes things can get, sometimes in the moment our reactions can be, it's really interesting. Some of us can be very emotionally present and understand what we're feeling in the moment. I'm actually someone who in the moment, I just sort of get in this weird survival mindset, and whatever's happening to me in the moment, especially if it's negative, I just live through it, and then as I reflect back on it, as I have the imagined interaction, reflecting back on it, then I'll experience the anger. Then I'll experience the hurt, right? It might have hurt a little bit at the time, but the more I think about it, the more it hurts, and it's actually the real hurt I should have experienced at the outset. So emotional valence is an attribute. Discrepancy, okay? How different is the imagined interaction from the actual communication? I've done this before with a job interview. You think it's going to go one way. You've imagined what the interaction is going to be like, even when it's sometimes you know the people, right? You go in and it just goes completely different. So sometimes the discrepancy can be very small. It was only slightly different, or it was nothing like the imagined interaction. Your expectation was completely off. Maybe it went better, maybe it went worse. So discrepancy is important. The dominance. How much did you dominate the talk, or how much did someone else dominate the talk? It is fascinating whenever you begin to break down some of these imagined interactions. You're capable of having an imagined interaction where you're not the one doing the majority of the talking. Sometimes you're reliving that lecture your boss gave you right before for me, I had a boss. Right, it's actually the inciting incident that led me to enter graduate school. I was working in insurance. My boss called me into his office and he lectured me for a while. Right before he lectured me right before he asked me to turn in my resignation. And for the longest time, I reflected back on it. I don't really think about it anymore because he got fired, and I have the job that I wanted. I had the job that this is my dream job, and I was already leaving anyway. He just wanted me to leave earlier. So, but I did not dominate that imagined interaction. My boss did for probably about 5 years after it happened. It took me a little while to really work through that and get over it. Proactive. Is it proactive or is it retroactive, right? Does it precede an encounter or does it follow an encounter? You can have simultaneously, right? Just like I said about conflict, I can be thinking about a conflict retroactively that's feeding into my proactive thinking on what I'm going to see when I see this person next, right? So proactivity, retroactivity. Specificity. How much of detail is there? Sometimes you have an imagined interaction that's just very general. I'll see them, I'll say hello, and they're going to, okay, they're going to say this, all right. Other times it's very detailed, it's very specific, and it's got a lot of detail and a lot of clarity to it. And a variety, okay? The number of different topics, how many partners are there. And by the way, I've been talking about imagined interactions sort of on the one-on-one level. You can imagine multiple parties. You're capable of more than just the one-on-one imagined interaction. Okay, so when you study imagined interaction, and I'm pretty sure now it is in our second discussion board. In the first discussion board this week, I'm gonna ask you to have an imagined interaction where you're asking your boss for something. And then in our second discussion board, we're going to process what those imagined interactions were like by looking at these different attributes. These attributes give us a grid for analyzing an imagined interaction. Oftentimes we have an imagined interaction and we're just left with the feeling. Maybe we feel good, maybe we feel bad, maybe we feel prepared, maybe we feel unprepared, whatever the imagined interaction is, but ultimately we can take these attributes and it allows us to analyze and understand really what's taking place in these imagined interactions. Okay? So overall, that's imagined interaction theory. I want to cover quickly the dangers of imagined interaction. So we've been talking about reliving things or thinking about an interaction before it happens. The dangers of this, it has uses. It has its positives, but it also has its dangers. I'm calling it rumination, mulling, or brooding. It really depends on who you're looking at. They all use these three words to kind of mean the same thing. Okay, so people will ruminate about arguments, and in some cases become obsessed with them. So the danger here is you start to have the imagined interaction. Maybe it's retroactive. Could be proactive as well, and it sort of takes over. All right. One of the things that's interesting about research here is that people who are vengeful, you can almost always see that they ruminated on the perceived injustice that they have received before they sought revenge. And sometimes that revenge is communicative. Sometimes, the revenge can be whatever type of revenge. Okay. So people will ruminate about it, and they'll become sort of obsessed with it. Rumination is associated with having retroactive and proactive imagined interactions, as interaction scenes are replayed, rehearsed, or both. So, as I said, it could be that you just can't stop thinking about the job interview, and you just keep going and keep going and keep going and keep going, or you're really looking forward to seeing that romantic partner the next time because you've decided that it's time to go to the next level. You're going to say I love you, or you're going to propose some sort of serious commitment, like whatever it is. You could ruminate, mull, or brood on those things. Okay. Furthermore, so here we go. This is interesting. Self-focused rumination, where you repeatedly focus on yourself and on the cause and implications of those negative feelings, and so you can get focused on yourself stuff, and you can begin to ruminate and brood and they're all kind of the same thing. They mean minor. The meanings are slightly different, but they're used in the writings sort of synonymously. Self-focused rumination is where you're just caught up in an interaction with yourself, and you're ruminating, and you can't seem to sort of break out of that. Okay. So rumination is an example of the negative consequences of imagined interactions. Conflict can be kept alive in terms of conversational memory as you reflect on a prior argument. Guy Finch, who I mentioned, we'll see in week 8, he calls rumination, he calls it mulling and brooding, he calls it picking at emotional scabs. He calls it this continual, just I'm going to pick this thing, I'm going to continue to make it worse instead of just leaving it alone and letting it heal. So I would encourage you, as you head into your journal entry for this week, because there's only one, as you head into your journal entry for this week, really think about which it's hard to say this early, which retroactive imagined interaction or interactions you find yourself having that continually pop up. Why do those pop up? Use the questions that are there in the journal to really reflect on this stuff. Are you ruminating? Are you mulling? Are you brooding? Are you actually doing something? Is it actually helping you, relieve tension? Like, is it actually a catharsis? Or, see, that's the thing with rumination is the function of the imagined interaction should be one of the 6. You should come to catharsis. You should come to self-understanding. You should come to conflict management, something like that. Rumination doesn't ever get there. Mulling or brooding on it doesn't ever get there. It just continually happens, and you're stuck with the feeling again. So I really encourage you to take the journal this week very seriously. There's only one, and the reason why I only assigned one this week was because I wanted you to have the time to really put into it. So folks, that's imagined interaction theory. I look forward to our case study discussion boards this week and your reflections on retroactive imagined interactions. I'll see you in the boards.